You have to rate Rocky as one of the all-time greats because of his longevity and his record. Being very short, he was able to get inside quicker with short arms and powerful punches. Plus, he had a tremendous heart and determination, and these things, what people don't know, don't show up on the statistics.
Who's the best boxer in history, you may ask? Many names come to mind, and Rocky Marciano is one of the first on the list. One famous commentator said if the judges counted one of his controversial fights as a loss, then he would lose all the magic of his name. Lost once and for all for generations of boxing fans to come, because Rocky Marciano would not seem like a good fighter without his record. But sports are not about subjunctive moods. Rocky Marciano, fighting at heavyweight, won all 49 fights and left the fight as an undefeated champion. He set a record that no other heavyweight boxer has been able to beat for nearly 70 years. In this edition, we will talk about Rocky's main rivals. We'll talk about this boxer's uniqueness, and we'll see if Marciano is the best heavyweight in the history of boxing.
Hello, that's it, Rocky Marciano. You knew him? You saw him fight?
Ooh, he hit hard. He hit you so hard at Johnny Kim folks in Africa.
Rocco Francis Marciano, as was the actual name of the future champion, was born on September 1st, 2023 in Brockton, in a rather large family of Italian immigrants. Rocky's father was disabled, and at an early age, he had to learn what it was like to be in need and work hard. He did all sorts of things so that the family could somehow make ends meet. He shoveled ice on sidewalks, worked as a bar dishwasher, dug dirt, and laid gas pipes. That's probably why he was a tough and, most importantly, strong-willed kid, despite his poor nutrition and poor economic situation. Rocky could have been a baseball player because he was pretty good at baseball. Still, he broke his arm at one of his practices and had to say goodbye to baseball. The next day was, to some extent, fateful for the young Marciano. A boxing coach, Gene Calgiano, watching Rocky, came up to him and invited him to his section. He had never seen the youngster in the ring, but with the experienced eye of a specialist, he saw great potential in this naive young boy. In addition, he had long waited to bring out the Italian countryman. In 1943, Marciano was mobilized to the Navy when he first tried his hand at boxing. Fistfights were very popular among sailors, and pub fights were especially popular. It was in such tough fights that Rocky's style was born, a low stance, ducking under his opponent's jabs and shortening the distance to a minimum. Partly, such tactics were stipulated by anthropometry. Marciano was just 6'1" and didn't have long arms. Because of that, he could not reach his bigger opponents. The talented boxer was noticed, and soon he signed a contract with a famous promoter, Al Vail.
Rocky Marciano!
Mike, a lot of people compare you with Rocky Marciano. How do you react to those comparisons?
Well, believe me, Alex, I'm flattered to be mentioned in the same breath with such a legendary fighter, but I really believe that I'm Mike Tyson and that was Rocky Marciano, and I'm doing the best that Mike Tyson could do. And really, I think it was a privilege to even be mentioned in the same sentence with Rocky.
The first fight of Rocky Marciano's professional career was held on March 17, 1947, against Lee Epperson. At that moment, the future legend was already 23 years old, and the fight ended by knockout in the third round. The second fight took place more than a year later and finished with TKO in the first round. After this fight, Rocky didn't take any more long breaks, and sometimes the gaps between fights were even less than a week. He trained a lot, and realizing that the long and medium distances were not for him, he devoted all his attention to developing his famous short punches, which over time reached enormous power. He worked on them endlessly in the gym, and then for 2 more hours in water. He reminded everyone who saw him in action of a bull terrier who knew no pity either for himself or, all the more so, for his opponents. Marciano continued to win non-stop, staging 10 to 15 fights per calendar year. Opponents gave up one after another, but Rocky did not always win easily. One of the most challenging fights was in 1950 against Roland La Starza. La Starza was Rocky's most fearsome opponent at the time. Roland had an outstanding record of 37 wins and not a single loss. Marciano won 25 fights and, of course, never lost a fight. One of them had to lose that night for the first time. The fight was very even and lasted 10 rounds and ended with Marciano winning by split decision. One referee gave the win to Marciano, the other to La Starza. The third one gave a draw, and the referee in the ring, who had the right by the rules at the time, gave the win to Marciano. It was Rocky Marciano's most controversial win. After his fight with La Starza, Marciano went on to collect one victory after another. It seemed like he should have been given a chance to fight for the world title, but that chance is still a long way off for Rocky. Perhaps one of the factors for such a delay was not the highest level of competitors. Marciano no longer had opponents of La Starza's caliber, and most of his opponents had a long track record of defeats. Rocky needed a top-level opponent, and Joe Louis, a boxing legend, was the perfect fit. Fighting Joe Louis. All boxing fans know who Joe Louis is. The Brown Bomber is considered one of the best heavyweights in the history of boxing. By the time of his fight with Marciano, he was an absolute living legend. Before that fight, Joe Louis had a record of 66 wins and 2 losses. But in reality, this was the twilight of the great Joe. He ended his career in 1948, but 2 years later, he was forced to fight in the ring again due to financial difficulties. It all came down to the fact that Louis was not in the optimal shape he had been in before, and the peak of his career was far behind him. But he was still winning and strong, and it was possible to beat Joe without a fight, even now. Rocky Marciano, on the other hand, was at his best. He had won all his fights, which by that time had already accumulated 37. This event was to be the fight of the year. The great Joe Louis versus the undefeated Rocky Marciano. Gong.
Polky eagerly answers the bell. The big question tonight, can the ex-champion come back? He's the slight favorite. He maneuvers Louis to the ropes and lands a right to the jaw in the opening seconds of round 1. Louis working behind his left jab. That's the punch you saw Rocky demonstrate in training, remember? Again, Marciano bullies Louis to the ropes. He's had 70 professional fights. Punches way free, but at the end of round 1, it's a good Marciano round. Lands a hard left hook to the head. He's pressuring, gunning for a shot at the heavyweight title. Did you see how quickly man pinned to the ropes? Seemed to be rusted through, and some observers of which goes to Uncle Sam for back taxes. Months before to come. It's the only weapon he still commands completely. For the first time in the round, Joe Louis finds his back to the ropes.
Time after time, Joe Louis's relentless jabs reached their target, but they didn't break Rocky. By the end of the fight, Marciano could not find a decent defense against the exhausting jabs, but he not only withstood the hail of blows that came his way, but also managed to KO the once great Joe in the 8th round.
He tears in to follow through his advantage before Louis ties him up. You can see that Louis is in trouble. A blazing right, and Louis sails through the ropes.
After this defeat, Joe Louis quit boxing forever, and Rocky Marciano became a much more unbeaten and tough fighter. However, after winning 38 fights and a fight against the old but legendary Joe Louis, Marciano was still not the world champion. He could get the title in a fight with Jersey Joe Walcott in a year. Fight for the title of world champion.
If you could pick any heavyweight champion in history, say from Marciano, Joe Louis, back to Jack Johnson, or even John L. Sullivan, who do you think would have given you the toughest fight of them?
The toughest fight would be the man who's the hardest to knock out, whether he's got a style, and a fellow who had no style, just a bull, was Rocky Marciano. He would be the most trouble, I think.
Rocky Marciano was obsessed with training. He trained 365 days a year and was very hard at that. Every morning, Rocky Marciano ran at least 10 kilometers on rough terrain. He especially liked to run uphill. Closer to the fight, he built up the mileage and ran 20 to 25 kilometers. Thanks to this, Rocky Marciano had incredible stamina, and sometimes people said he was like a bull with gloves. Rocky liked to work on his punches in the water. and he stood up to his neck and delivered different blows for a long time. Rocky Marciano's unique talent was that he could land many hard punches and throw 10 punches in a row while being hit with a single punch. Rocky's willingness to sacrifice his very life to win made him a formidable force for any opponent. And when he came out to fight for the boxing throne where Joe Walcott was seated, the stakes were 9-5 in favor of Marciano. The fight took place on September 23, 1952. It was the 43rd fight for Rocky.
That's important. Here they go. And Marciano is an amateur and looks as if he might be going right to work on it. Down from a left hook.
Jersey Joe Walcott, the world champion, was 9 years older than Marciano. Realizing that he couldn't take 15 rounds with a young guy in his prime, Walcott went straight ahead, intending to finish the fight in the first rounds. In the second round, Rocky was knocked down for the first time in his career after a hard punch to the eye.
Down from a left hook.
In the ninth round, an elbow painfully grazed Marciano's old head wound, and Rocky's situation became even more difficult. Marciano was bleeding from his shattered eyebrows and a deep wound on his nose, hopelessly behind on points.
Marciano's rocking. Walcott trying to finish him. He can finish him. Old Joe's.
Walcott only had 3 rounds left to go, and then he would win the fight. Marciano could only win by knocking out the champion, which he successfully did in round 13.
Well, it plainly is intent on staying away now. Right hand, Walcott. Rocky Marciano is the heavyweight champion of the world. Rocky Marciano.
Walcott recalled it this way: "As soon as I went down, all the lights went out. I never wanted to lose to anybody, but if I had to lose, I'm glad I lost to you. You're a good fighter, and you're going to be a great champion." Rocky Marciano finally achieved his main goal of becoming a world champion.
And the new heavyweight champion of the world, Rocky Marciano.
We have 4, count them, 4 heavyweight champions. Rocky Marciano, and then Muhammad Ali, and maybe Larry Holmes afterwards, were the last vestiges of a time when the heavyweight champion and the heavyweight championship, his realm, were great. Today they are G-R-A-T-E, just great.
Title defense. After getting the belt, Marciano started to step into the ring much less frequently. Marciano had a severe back problem that took him out of the ring for quite a while. Still, he had 6 more title defenses before he was done with boxing. He fought against very serious opponents in all 6 fights, and in all of these fights, he was able to win, as he always did. In May 1953, there was a rematch between Marciano and Walcott. Marciano sent the former champion to a knockdown. Walcott was not shocked, but simply sat on the floor until the end, and when he rose at the count of 10, the referee controversially stopped the fight. The challenger's corner began to argue, but the referee wouldn't listen to them and removed himself from the ring afterward.
It's all over and the fight's over. Ruby Joe drops around the canvas again.
In September 1953, Marciano met again with the unyielding Roland Lastarza, whose victory over him is considered the most controversial of Rocky's career. The fight was again reasonably even, and it could have repeated the fate of their first fight too, had Marciano not sent Lastarza to a hard knockdown in the 11th round.
Another right, a left, and another right sends Lastarza sailing back through the ropes onto the ring apron. Referee Ruby Goldstein.
Lastarza bravely got up, but Marciano left him no chance, and the referee stopped the fight, registering a technical knockout.
And there it is, the finish. Referee Goldstein breaks them up, sends Rocky back to his corner.
This time, Rocky handled Lastarza very convincingly. Marciano, defending his title, also fought Ezzard Charles, the former world champion. Rocky defeated him twice.
Charles goes down. He's up at the count of 2.
In September 1955, a fight was fought between world heavyweight champion Rocky Marciano and world light heavyweight champion legend Archie Moore. Marciano knocked out his opponent in the 9th round. This was Rocky's last fight, and he never got in the ring again. After boxing.
I would like to announce my retirement from boxing at this time. I promised my wife that I would retire before the month of May arrived. We were on a vacation in South America when I made that promise.
Rocky Marciano proved to everyone that he was a great boxer. He defeated all the greatest boxers of that time, such as Joe Louis, Ezzard Charles, Archie Moore, and Roland Lastarza. He won the title and successfully defended it 6 times, beating powerful opponents. He won 49 fights, 43 of them by knockout, and retired from boxing at the age of only 32. Today's fighters would wake up in a cold sweat if they knew they had to be in the ring 49 times in their 9-year professional career. Nowadays, only 1 fight in 6 months is the norm. Marciano hung up his gloves and went entirely into business, where he was just as successful. In addition to sports, he had commercial talents. Rocky intelligently invested in various real estate. Spiteful tongues whispered that Marciano's connections with the mafia helped him. Rocky was constantly flying all over America, conducting numerous deals. He invariably refused offers to return to boxing, even though a lot of money was at stake. Everything was all right on the family front, too. Marciano was an exemplary father and family man. A day before his 46th birthday, the boxer tragically died in a plane crash. Rocky's business partner was flying the plane, and they had another friend in the cockpit with them. The pilot was disoriented by lousy weather, and the plane crashed into a tree near the runway upon landing. The funeral drew a crowd of thousands to see the legend off. The great Muhammad Ali had good words for Marciano. When I was a kid and heard on the radio that Rocky was coming into the ring, I knew in advance who would win. Marciano greatly influenced me and my career by being a great example, a great boxer, and a great man.
I lost a great friend and certainly a great man to boxing. He was a great champion.
Are you pretty proud of your daddy over the years?
Oh, yeah. I always have been.